Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. Today we're going to jump into some decisions, some policies that they really shook things up when they were first announced and implemented, and we're still feeling the effects. We're talking about Donald Trump's immigration policies.
Yeah, it's a world that was often just chaotic. Lots of controversies swirling around, and it sparked so much debate that's still raging on today.
Yeah, no doubt about it. So our goal in this deep dive, what we're going to try to do is, well, I guess get past those headlines,
Yeah,
really unpack the nuts and bolts of these decisions.
right, because there's a lot more to it than just what you see on the surface.
Yeah.
Where did these ideas come from? What were the legal battles? How did they actually affect people, communities, society as a whole?
Right. And what could be like the lasting consequences, because it's not over, right? The story continues to unfold.
Exactly. And to really give you a good grasp on all this, we're going to zoom in on 5 key areas.
Okay, sounds good. Lay it on me. What are those 5 areas?
Okay, so first we've got the travel ban. That was that initial executive order, the one that restricted entry from certain countries.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. Very early on in the Trump administration.
Yep, right out of the gate. Then, of course, there's the border wall. You can't talk about Trump and immigration without talking about the wall. It was like his signature promise.
Absolutely.
Okay, then we have the family separation policy. That one really, really got to people. Generated so much discussion, so much pain. And then the asylum restrictions. All the different ways they made it harder for people to seek asylum in the U.S.
Wow. A lot to cover.
Yeah, and then finally there's this whole thing about an invasion, like this narrative that was used to justify a lot of these policies, including a bigger military presence at the border.
Okay, so that's our roadmap for today. Let's dive right in, starting with the travel ban. Now, if I remember correctly, this happened very early on, right? Like January 2017.
You got it right off the bat with Executive Order 13780.
Now, for those who maybe aren't as familiar with the ins and outs of government, what exactly is an executive order? Like, what power does it hold?
Well, basically, an executive order is it's a directive, a formal order from the president.
Yeah.
And it has the force of law, but only within the executive branch. So it's not like Congress passing a law,
Yeah.
but it can still have a big impact.
Gotcha. So what did this particular executive order, this travel ban, what did it actually do? Who did it affect?
So this order, a lot of people called it the Muslim ban. It barred travelers, immigrants, and refugees from several countries. And these countries, most of them, were predominantly Muslim countries. And it started with 7 countries on the list.
7.
Yeah, but by 2020, that list had grown to 13.
Wow. And what was the administration's stated goal with this? Why did they feel it was necessary?
Well, their main argument was national security. They said it was about keeping out people they called terrorists and jihadists.
Okay. But I remember even back then when it was first announced, there was pushback, right? A lot of people raised concerns.
Oh, absolutely. Massive pushback. You had groups like the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union. They immediately called it discriminatory,
Yeah.
Islamophobic even.
And what were their main arguments against it?
Their point was it unfairly targeted people based on their religion, where they were from, their national origin. It was like, you're being singled out because you're Muslim or from a Muslim-majority country.
Right, right. I remember those arguments.
And the impact, like the immediate impact when this thing went into effect, it was dramatic. You saw protests popping up everywhere, especially at airports. Families were getting separated. Like people would arrive and their loved ones couldn't even get into the country. Travelers stranded. It was chaos.
Wow. And as things like this often do, it ended up in the courts.
Oh, for
Right.
sure. Very quickly. Those early versions of the travel ban, they faced a ton of legal challenges. And the courts, they often blocked it, saying, this violates the Constitution. This is discrimination based on religion.
And how did the administration respond to that?
Well, they kept trying to tweak it. They revised the ban a couple of times, trying to address those legal problems that the courts were pointing out. So you had different versions of it coming out.
But ultimately, it went all the way up to the Supreme Court, right? The big one.
Right.
Trump v. Hawaii.
Right.
That's the case that decided once and for all whether the travel ban was legal.
Exactly. That was the showdown. And in June 2018, the Supreme Court, in a 5-4 decision, they upheld it. They said, yeah, the third version of this travel ban, it's within the president's power.
Within his power to do what exactly?
Well, they said it's part of his authority over national security and immigration. So basically they were saying the president has broad power in these areas, and this ban falls under that.
So legally it was upheld. But even with that ruling, there was still a lot of disagreement, a lot of concern about the ban.
Oh, huge disagreement. One of the justices, Justice Sotomayor, she wrote a dissenting opinion, and she argued that the ban completely upended this long history, this tradition of how we deal with refugees. It was a big departure from the past.
And predictable, human rights groups, they continued to criticize it.
Yeah. They said, okay, maybe it's legal, but it basically says discrimination is okay. It sends a message that it's okay to target people based on their nationality and religion.
So beyond the legal back and forth, beyond the arguments, what was the actual impact of this travel ban, like on people's lives? What did it actually mean for people?
Well, the effects were, they were profound. Thousands of people got denied entry to the U.S., people seeking refuge, people who already had visas. Everything was just thrown into chaos. Families separated, sometimes for years. And you can't deny it tarnished America's image. You know, that whole idea of America being a safe haven, a welcoming place for immigrants, that took a hit.
And is it safe to say that this issue, the travel ban, even though it happened a while ago, it's not really over, is it?
You're right. It might not be over. Some experts, they're looking at what's been happening recently, and they're saying, hey, we might see these kinds of travel bans, these country-based restrictions. They might come back. They might even get expanded. It's definitely something to watch.
Okay, that's something to keep in mind as we move forward. Let's shift gears now to something else that was just, so central to Trump's presidency, something that everyone remembers. The border wall.
Yeah, the wall. That was you couldn't escape it. It was everywhere. Every rally, every speech. It was the cornerstone of his campaign, his platform on immigration. He promised to build this great, great wall on the border with Mexico.
And what was the main justification for that?
He presented it as the solution, the ultimate solution to stop illegal immigration, to fight human trafficking, to stop the flow of drugs into the country.
Okay, and he wasted no time, right? He signed that executive order to get things going pretty much as soon as he took office.
Exactly. January 25th, 2017, the order was signed. Construction was officially underway.
Now, this executive order, it didn't just say build a wall, right? It got into the specifics of what this wall should be.
Well, yeah, it's pretty specific. It defined it as, and I quote, a contiguous physical wall or other similarly secure, contiguous, and impassable physical barrier. So basically, make it tough, make it hard to get through.
No kidding. And how much of the wall was actually built during his first term?
By the end of his first term, they had put up something like 450 miles.
450 miles.
Yeah, but there's a catch. A lot of that, it wasn't brand new wall, going up in places where there was nothing before. A big chunk of it was replacing stuff that was already there, older barriers.
I see. So it wasn't all completely new construction.
Right. And then there's the whole question of how effective it actually was.
Right. Did it actually do what it was supposed to do? Did it reduce illegal crossings? I remember hearing all these different numbers, all these claims being thrown around.
Yeah, it got pretty messy. The Trump administration, they loved to point to data from DHS, the Department of Homeland Security.
Yeah.
And they said, look, in some areas where we put up new wall or replace the old stuff, illegal crossings dropped by 87%.
87%, that's huge.
Sounds impressive, right? But, there are a lot of experts who are skeptical. They say, hold on, was it really the wall that caused that drop? Or were other things going on at the same time that might have had an impact, like changes in how they were enforcing immigration laws or even the economy, Like if the economy's bad in certain places, people might be less likely to migrate.
Right. That makes sense. It's hard to isolate just one factor.
Exactly. And then there's the cost, which was, well, let's just say it wasn't cheap. Building a wall across that kind of terrain, it was a massive undertaking, and it got expensive, really expensive.
How much are we talking?
By 2021, they had spent over $15 billion.
15 billion with a B.
Billion. And a lot of things drove up that price tag, like all the legal battles they had to fight to get land, environmental concerns, all that stuff adds up. They even ended up taking money from the Pentagon, like $2.5 billion that was supposed to go to the military, and they redirected it to the wall.
Wow. That's a lot of money. And Congress wasn't too happy about that, right?
They were not happy. But the Supreme Court, they said it was okay. In 2019, they ruled that the administration could do that.
I see. So it wasn't just about the cost. There were other arguments against the wall, right? Like people questioning whether it would even work.
Oh, yeah, tons of arguments. A lot of critics, they said, look, a lot of people who come to the U.S. without authorization, they don't sneak across the border in the middle of the night. They come in legally through ports of entry, and they just overstay their visas. A wall's not going to stop that.
That's a good point.
And then there were the environmentalists, the scientists. They were raising the alarm about, endangered species like the jaguar and how the wall would disrupt their migration patterns. They were saying this is going to cause real damage to the ecosystem.
Yeah, I remember hearing about those concerns as well.
And, here's the thing. It's 2025 now, and there are still, according to the American Immigration Council, there are still something like 1,500 active duty troops stationed at the border. And Trump has said he wants to build more wall if he gets back in office.
So it's an ongoing thing.
It is. And in the end, a lot of people are saying the wall, it's more about symbolism than actual security. It's like it's a statement, a very physical statement about taking a hard line on immigration. But a lot of experts, they're saying, if you really want to address this, you got to get to the root causes. Like, why are people leaving their homes in the first place? The poverty, the violence, the political instability. Those are the things that drive people to migrate.
Okay, so a very complex issue with no easy answers. Let's move on now to something that, this is just, it's a really tough one to talk about. The separation of families at the border. This is a policy that, it really got to people. It caused so much outrage and heartbreak.
Yeah, it's a dark chapter. Really disturbing. In April 2018, Jeff Sessions, who was the Attorney General at the time, he announced this zero-tolerance policy. And this was specifically about people crossing the border illegally.
And what did zero tolerance mean in practice?
It meant everyone caught crossing illegally, they were going to be prosecuted, no exceptions.
And that led directly to families being separated, right?
It did, because you can't put kids in jail with their parents. So when the parents were detained, the kids, they were taken away, put in the custody of Health and Human Services.
How many children were we talking about? How many families were affected by this?
The numbers they're heartbreaking. Frontline, they did this investigation in 2019, and they estimated that over 5,500 kids were separated from their parents between 2017 and 2021. And we're talking about really little kids, some of them just babies, like 4 months old.
What was the reasoning behind this policy? What were they hoping to achieve?
Well, they said it was about deterrence. Like if people knew they'd be separated from their kids, they wouldn't try to cross the border. But then there were also these reports, coming from inside the White House, suggesting that it was also a way to pressure Congress. Like, hey, if you want us to stop separating families, give us the money for the wall, give us these other immigration reforms we want.
I see. So using it as leverage. And the public reaction to this, it was intense.
Intense is an understatement. You had these images everywhere of kids in cages, literally cages. And then there were these audio recordings that got leaked, of kids crying, screaming for their parents. It was devastating. And people were outraged. Protests all over the country, international condemnation, you name it. One Congresswoman, Jan Schakowsky, she called it state-sponsored child abuse. And that really captured how a lot of people felt.
And then there was the story of Marco Antonio Munoz.
Yeah, a Honduran man who, after being separated from his 3-year-old son, he couldn't take it. He committed suicide. That was in May 2018. It highlighted the human cost of this policy in the most tragic way imaginable.
So did they ever actually end family separation?
Well, under all that pressure, all that public outcry, Trump did sign an executive order in June 2018, and it was supposed to end the separations. But even after that, there were reports that it was still happening, maybe not as widespread, but it was still happening even into 2019.
And what about the families that were already separated? Were they ever reunited?
When Biden came in, he set up this task force to try to find the parents and reunite the families. They made some progress, reuniting about 800 kids with their parents. But as of April 2024, there were still almost 1,400 kids who were still separated.
Still separated.
And to make matters worse, now that Trump's back in office, he got rid of that reunification task force. So it's like, what happens to those families now is really unclear.
Wow. And the trauma, the lasting impact on those kids who were separated, it must be just, I can't even imagine.
It's a huge concern. The mental health experts, the child development specialists, they're saying a lot of these kids, they're going to be dealing with the consequences of this for years to come.
Yeah.
There are already documented cases of PTSD, developmental delays. It's really sad.
Yeah. Okay. Let's move on now to another big area where the Trump administration made some big changes. Asylum. They made it a lot tougher for people to seek asylum in the U.S.
Yeah, for sure. They had this whole strategy of making it as hard as possible, hoping it would discourage people from even trying. One of the main things they did was this thing called the transit ban.
The transit ban? What's that?
So this was introduced in July 2019, and it basically said that if you were traveling to the U.S. and you passed through another country on the way, you had to apply for asylum in that country first. If you didn't, or if you got rejected, you couldn't apply for asylum in the U.S.
So you couldn't just show up at the U.S. border and ask for asylum.
Right, and this hit people from Central America and Cuba really hard because they usually travel through Mexico to get to the U.S.
So did that hold up in court?
Well, it got challenged, of course, and in July 2020, the Ninth Circuit Court, they said it was illegal. They said it violated the Administrative Procedures Act, which is all about how the government makes rules, and they said it would cause irreparable harm to people seeking asylum. But then the Supreme Court, they put a hold on that ruling, so the ban was still in effect while the legal battles continued.
Okay, so back and forth in the courts.
Yeah. And then there was this other things, the Migrant Protection Protocols.
I've heard of that. That's the Remain in Mexico policy, right?
Exactly. That one started in January 2019, and it forced asylum seekers to stay in Mexico while they waited for their court hearings in the U.S.
And those border towns in Mexico, they're not exactly known for being safe, are they?
No, not at all. A lot of them are really dangerous. Doctors Without Borders, they did a report, and they found that something like 80% of migrants they talked to in places like Nuevo Laredo, they had been kidnapped, and 45% had been assaulted. It's a really bad situation.
Wow. So how many people were sent back to Mexico under this policy?
By August 2019, they were sending back like 473 people every day. And by the time Biden paused the program in 2021, over 70,000 people had been sent back to Mexico.
But wait, didn't Trump reinstate that policy when he got back in office?
He did. January 21, 2025, back in action.
Yep.
And on top of that, they shut down the CBP One app, which was this app that people were using to schedule appointments for asylum processing. NPR did a report and said that app had helped almost 1 million people enter the U.S. legally.
So they made it even harder.
They did.
Hmm.
And, you know, the whole point of all these restrictions, it seems like it's just to make it so difficult, so scary, that people would just give up and not even try to come to the U.S.
Make it as unappealing as possible. But that brings up some ethical questions, right? I mean, these are people fleeing violence, persecution.
Exactly. And a lot of human rights groups, they were saying this whole approach, it violates international law, you know, like the idea that you shouldn't send people back to a place where they're in danger. But the administration, they were focused on deterrence. And the result was a lot of people were stuck in really dangerous situations in Mexico.
Okay, so we've talked about the travel ban, the border wall, family separation, asylum restrictions, all tough stuff. But there's one more thing we need to talk about, and it's really more about the language, the rhetoric that was used to justify these policies, this whole idea of an invasion at the border.
Yeah, that word invasion, it was used a lot. And it was powerful. You know, it created this image of a threat, a crisis that needed to be met with force. And it paved the way for some pretty extreme measures. Like there was this executive order in January 2025 called Guaranteeing the States Protection Against Invasion.
Wow. What did that order do?
Well, it said that the president has the power to repel, repatriate, or remove migrants at the border, and they use public health and safety as the reason. But basically, it shut down the border to asylum seekers. Like almost no one could get in.
Was that even legal?
Well, the ACLU, they said it was totally illegal, unprecedented even. And a bunch of states, like 22 of them, they sued to try to block it. And a federal judge in Washington state, he called it blatantly unconstitutional. But the administration, they were pushing the limits, testing the boundaries of what they could do.
And this invasion rhetoric, it also led to more military being sent to the border, right?
Well, yeah, for sure. During Trump's first term, they sent almost 5,000 troops down there. And Mexico also sent more of their military to their side of the border. It was like this big military buildup.
And is it still like that?
Yeah, it's even more now. Like Trump has issued these orders, sending another 1,500 active duty troops to help build the wall and to handle deportation flights. And there are even reports that he's thinking about using, like the Insurrection Act or the Alien Enemies Act, which are these really old laws that were meant for completely different situations to enforce immigration law.
Wow. And is that even legal?
I mean, legal experts are saying it's a long shot. It's probably going to get challenged in court, but it just shows how far they're willing to go.
And what are people saying about this whole invasion framing and the use of the military?
It's really divided people. Like some people, they're all for it. They say it's about protecting the country, keeping us safe. And they point to guys like Mark Krikorian, who's from this group called the Center for Immigration Studies. And he's saying, yeah, all this is perfectly legal. The president has the authority to do this. But then you have other people, they're really worried. They say this is dangerous. It's turning a humanitarian issue into a military one. They say it's a misuse of the military. It's creating fear and tension, especially in border communities.
Yeah, it sounds like a really complicated situation with a lot of different perspectives. So, we've covered a lot of ground here. I mean, we've talked about some really specific policies, but I'm curious about the broader picture. Like, what have been the overall impacts of all these changes, all these decisions on the U.S. as a whole?
Well, the effects are widespread. I mean, you can see it in the economy, in our legal system, in our society, everywhere. Take the economy, for example. During Trump's first term, we saw these labor shortages popping up all over the place, especially in industries that rely on immigrant labor, like agriculture and construction. And a lot of people are saying, hey, this is partly because of all these restrictions. There just aren't as many immigrant workers coming in.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Supply and demand, right?
Right. And then there's the impact on our courts. The immigration courts are completely overwhelmed. Like by 2025, there were something like 3.7 million cases just sitting there waiting to be heard.
Yeah.
And with all these deportation plans, Axios is saying it could take 16 years to clear that backlog. It's insane.
Wow, 16 years. So, what about the social impact? How has all this affected our society, the way we interact with each other?
It's definitely made things more divided, more polarized. I mean, if you look at polls, a lot of Americans, they do support deporting undocumented immigrants. But when you start talking of the specifics, like separating families or using the military, then the support drops off.
Yeah.
People are uncomfortable with those tactics, even if they agree with the overall goal. Like there was this Axios Ipsos poll in 2025, and it showed 66% of people supported deporting undocumented immigrants. But when they asked about specific methods, the support went down.
So, there's nuance there. People are making distinctions.
Yeah, it's not just black and white. And, you know, the role of the president in all of this, it's really interesting. Trump, he used executive orders and other executive actions a lot to push through his immigration agenda.
Yep.
I mean, between 2017 and 2020, he issued over 400 of these immigration-related actions. Yeah, according to the Migration Policy Institute.
Yeah.
And a lot of these actions, they kind of bypassed Congress. You know, he didn't wait for them to pass laws. He just did it through executive action. And that sparked a whole debate about how much power the president really has when it comes to immigration.
Right, because there are supposed to be checks and balances, right?
Exactly. And that's where the courts come in. They play a really important role in reviewing these policies and making sure they're constitutional. And sometimes they block them or change them. Like the Supreme Court, they upheld some of these policies, like expedited removal, which makes it faster to deport people. But there's still a lot of lawsuits going on challenging things like the asylum ban. And it really boils down to this clash between national security and human rights.
Right, that tension is always there.
Yeah. And then you have the international community watching all of this, and they have their own opinions about what's right and wrong. It's a really complicated picture.
And it's not over, is it? The
Yeah.
situation at the border, it's constantly changing, evolving.
It is. I mean, Trump's back in office, and he's bringing back a lot of the policies from his first term, and he's even adding new ones. It's like he's doubling down on this hardline approach. But like we've been talking about, these policies, they face all kinds of legal challenges, and there are logistical problems too. And then you have stuff like Title 42, which was this public health rule they used during the pandemic to turn away asylum seekers. And he's brought that back too. But even public health experts are saying, this doesn't make sense. It's not about public health anymore.
So, a lot of moving pieces, a lot of uncertainty.
Absolutely. And through all of this, it's important to remember the human cost. The families that have been torn apart, the people stuck in dangerous situations, the fear and uncertainty in immigrant communities. These are real people whose lives are being affected by these decisions.
It's a powerful reminder. So, to sum all of this up, it sounds like Trump's approach to immigration, it's been this mix of executive action, legal battles, and just, deep divisions within American society.
It has been. It's been chaotic at times, and it's definitely left a mark. We started by talking about the travel ban, you know, how it targeted people from certain countries and raised all these questions about discrimination. Then we talked about the border wall, this huge symbol of his presidency, but also this really expensive project with debatable effectiveness. And then, of course, family separation, which was just, a moral low point for a lot of people. And then all the ways they made it harder for people to seek asylum, these policies that were really about making people give up, making it so hard that they just wouldn't even try. And then this whole idea of an invasion, this rhetoric that was used to ramp up fear and justify these really harsh measures, including sending the military to the border.
It's been quite a journey going through all of this, and it really highlights some of the fundamental questions we have to grapple with as a country. Like, how do we balance national security with human rights? How much power should the president have? What does it mean to be a nation of immigrants in this day and age? These are big, weighty questions.
They are. And there are no easy answers. You have people on both sides who feel very strongly about this. You have people who support these policies. They say it's about protecting our jobs, our safety, our way of life. And then you have people who are completely opposed. They say these policies are cruel, they're inhumane, they're un-American.
And I think it's safe to say that this debate, this conversation, it's not going away anytime soon.
No, it's not. And it's important for all of us to stay informed, to engage in this conversation, to think critically about these issues. Because the decisions we make, the policies we support, they have real consequences for real people.
Absolutely. And, it reminds me of something John Stuart Mill said. He said that even a wrong opinion can have some truth in it and that we need to hear all sides of an argument to really understand something. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with this question. What have we learned from this deep dive into Trump's immigration policies? What aspects of this whole thing do you find most important, most concerning, and why? These are questions worth thinking about, talking about, because the future of immigration, it's something we're all going to have to figure out together.